I want to just start with a shout out to Rick Violet, who really saved us last week in Anaheim by being the one person to get up in front of the member director forum, kind of explain what was going on with the initiative and what we needed. And it's not that simple, and you did a great job. So I want to say thank you. I also want to just start with a really quick story. From yesterday, I was able to speak to a small group of young women at St. Mary's College, which is up above the Getty. And I don't know, they weren't all seniors, but they were all kind of in the business school, accounting majors and this and that. And I asked them, how many of you aspire to own a home in California? And every single hand went up, right? So that was really great. And they told me the story of that particular plot of land. In the 1920s, the nuns wanted to buy the land that's now above the Getty Center, and the Archdiocese said, no, LA will never get over there. And so the nuns raised the money themselves and bought the land. It is still not part of the Archdiocese, and can you imagine what that property is worth today? So does everybody regret selling their first home? Right? Everybody, we should have held on to that. So anyway, that was pretty terrific. So I just want to start and say I have no idea what's going to happen this year. I'm going to give you some ideas. I'm going to give you some trends. I'm going to talk about some of the experience and what is likely to happen. But it's very humbling that the consensus forecast for mortgage rates about a year and a half ago was 5.2%. And where are we right now? 3.6, 3.7. I mean, hello, that's very humbling. But it's really important that you think these things through so you're not surprised that you're surprised, right? So that you know something big, if that could happen, here's my plan to deal with it. So I hope that you can accept this information in the context of being prepared for the unpredictable world that we're living in. So I put this up here because the economy is not great for everybody. It's great for a lot of people that weren't employed are now employed. Growth has not been stellar, but we've been in this recovery for over 10 years. We had our 10-year anniversary. This is the longest post-war recovery that we've ever had. And it hasn't been the most rapid, but it's been the longest in terms of longevity. So that really is something to celebrate. The fourth quarter number actually isn't here yet. I don't know why that says Q4, but in Q3 we went from 2% to 2.1%. So we're kind of growing in that moderate 2.5% range. Consumer spending has been pretty good. You have a lot more people working. We've actually, over the last couple of years, had some wage gains showing up. Retail sales have been increasing with some pretty good growth over the last couple of months, so that's good. CPI's been well behaved, and the unemployment rate is at historic lows, 3.5%. So if you are actively looking for work and can't find a job, 3.5% of those people are not employed. If you are underemployed, if you are exhausted from looking, if you are a white male over the age of 55 or a black female single head of household, your unemployment rate is at least twice that and maybe even more. So there are pockets of the population that aren't participating in this incredible job market, right? There's kind of a mismatch between even today what people major in college and what people are hiring for. And kudos to all the psychology majors in the room, but honestly, can you really figure people out? No. So learn how to code. It's really a lot better. But there's a lot of I don't know if there was always this much uncertainty in the world, but it just seems like more, right? And maybe it's the news cycle, maybe it's social media, but if you want to just pick one thing, if you don't want to fall asleep at night, just pick a topic. There's just a lot to be concerned about. A year ago, the focus was on the trade war with China. There has been a deal signed. We haven't seen all the details of it, but that's kind of simmered down. But in the spirit of payback, now we have this coronavirus, and that's what is really, I think, even I was listening on the way down here to the podcast that we did about 3 weeks ago on the economy, the Housing Matters podcast, and it was just a slight mention of it. And now with so many more deaths and so many people being infected and it's spreading around the world, I think there's really a lot more concern about kind of the spillover effects of how that's going to affect the global economy. When we look at the confidence index for businesses around the world, they are more and more concerned. Consumers, on the other hand, at least given the January consumer confidence numbers, are feeling pretty good, right? And that's understandable. They're looking at their local economy always. They're looking at a very tight labor market. They're looking at the price of their home, even if they're not going to move for 20 years, which is too many of them, but even if they're going to stay put, they've got some good equity in their home. And they're looking at the stock market, right, that had a stellar year in 2019. Here's a look at kind of this recovery, this, I would say lackluster, but let's take it, recovery that we've been experiencing. Here's a look at the unemployment rate. Can you believe the California unemployment rate, that there's always a gap with the US? We're down to 3.9%, right? In San Francisco, the unemployment rate is 1.8%. And even in Tulare County, it's 7.4%. Right, and typically the Central Valley is double digits. So that's been pretty great. And where we've seen this play out, I think to a great extent, has been with respect to rates, right? So what we find is the Fed has a plan, and then the global economy has a very different plan, you know, and if something happens politically or the coronavirus as an example, what happens to capital? It flows into the United States. We are still the safe haven. And so sometimes the Fed that 2 weeks ago said, we're going to wait and see, and we think we might even be able to kind of adjust upwards a little bit. Now they say they're carefully monitoring the situation. And if the spillover effects are big enough to affect growth in the United States, and JP Morgan has already reduced their growth forecast for this year, you might even see some cuts in rates coming. So things just happen very, very quickly. This week, Powell will be presenting his biannual report to Congress, and the virus is mentioned several times as really being something that might be a problem. A friend was saying this morning that there was a plant, a Toyota plant that was closed in Japan because the supply chain is broken. They're running out of parts to make cars. And this is why this is going to have a domino effect around the world. We just don't know right now how big it's going to be. Is it going to be, are they going to come up with a cure next week and we're all going to be okay? Or is this going to be the epidemic that we don't want and have a very significant role on the economy? So we'll just have to wait and see about that. No doubt that lower rates have helped us. And I think you remember over the summer when rates started to go down, the housing market didn't really respond right away. We're kind of like, okay, what's the stumbling block? Why aren't we seeing that knee-jerk reaction that we typically do? And it really was actually delayed, right? And people were able to kind of recognize that renewed affordability, and the market was a little bit slower in the first half of last year. So we really had, as we look back on 2019, we were still down in terms of sales, but we were down less than half what we thought we would be. And the second half of the year was really pretty strong. I mean, we ended on a very firm note. In fact, in part because of approved affordability and the fact that the mortgage payments were going down because of the overall drop in rates. So as we look at 2020, I think the forecasts are all very tentative at this point because we're just not sure. The impact that this virus is going to have on the global economy. And then there's, I'm sure, trade and all kinds of other things. But we will stay in kind of a moderate moving forward posture. Job growth is slowing in part because we're reaching a supply constraint in terms of the type of workers that are needed, right? They're just not there in the range that we need. Unemployment up a little bit, 3.9, CPI 2%, real disposable income about 2.5%. So again, this not hitting a home run, but definitely a good solid second for the economy in 2020. And then here's just a look at where we are in California. I think the big thing, I remember in 1970 that the population of California, does anybody know? 20 million. 50 years later, we're at 40 million. So in 50 years, the California population has doubled. And we have really seen, and I'll have some local data on the economy. We're doing very, very well because we've got such a concentration of the hot industries, be it tech, entertainment, biomedical, and all that kind of stuff. One of the other big question marks, and we get this question a lot at CAR, is what impact is the election going to have? Well, one of the obvious takeaways is uncertainty. Will Trump be reelected? Will we have a Democrat in the White House? So when you look historically at the housing market and how it behaves before and after elections, there is data that suggests that the market slows down more than normal before an election, and then after the election, it picks up again. And it's, again, that uncertainty. We're not sure what's going to happen, so let's hold back and see. In terms of whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, there's no clear data suggesting one or the other in terms of a correlation with economic growth. So I'm sorry, I mean, we certainly could spend a day talking about policy options, and let's say, Fannie and Freddie are privatized, what that could mean for housing and so on and so forth. But when you just look at the trends over a very long period of time, a presidential election probably has a short-term impact right before and right after the election, but in terms of a long-term indicator of housing market, either growth or contraction, that data just isn't there. So I want to kind of switch gears and talk about a topic that's near and dear to all our hearts, which is housing, right? And I want to suggest that there's really two different worlds here, and there's the number of sales world and there's the price world, and they're obviously connected. But when people talk to me about how great and strong the market is, I know they're talking about prices. Because in terms of sales in California, transactions have, with few exceptions, been flat for 10 years, right? Given the macroeconomic engines that are fueling housing demand in California, the response has not been there. So a couple of things. We do a Google poll every month asking 300 California consumers, is it a good time to buy and is it a good time to sell? So it's just, again, a little barometer on what they're thinking. And in January, we had a little uptick from 24 to 25%, not even probably that significant, but it was encouraging in terms of whether it's a good time to buy. And again, a reaction, I think, to the rate environment. What's even more important for you guys is we had a 5% increase in people that thought it was a good time to sell. So I think that cues us up for some reason for optimism as we head into 2020. Here is kind of the crib sheet summary of all the kind of relative high-level statistics on the housing market in California. If you haven't been to our market data page on the website, we have the same kind of infographics for every county, every city. You can even do it by zip code. I mean, we're really able to drill down. The important thing to remember about last year is we were down 1.2%. Our original forecast, I believe, was around 3.2, something like that, was over twice the drop. So that engine of growth that we experienced in the second half of the year really saved us. The December price was around 615,000. That was up 10% on a year-over-year basis. And remember, a year ago, we were looking at kind of low single-digit increases, so that was a big rebound. Inventory, 2.5 months supply, very, very tight. Days on market, about a month, 28 days. That's not normal, right? I know some of your sellers, after 6 days, wonder where all the multiple offers are. And, you know, I think you just need to use the data, right? And kind of show them what the temperature of the market is right now. And the sales to list price ratio is up almost 1% on a year-to-year basis. So again, that strength in the market in terms of sales price. So digging in a little bit deeper, here is that 10-year trend that I keep referring to, where from about 2010 through the end of last year, I'm not saying there wasn't movement in the market, but it wasn't sustained in any given direction. And given household growth, income growth, job growth, 50-year lows in mortgage rates, if I were just kind of coming in from another planet and you told me all that, I would expect transactions to be like 25% higher than they are. And we all know why they're not, right? Has anyone here been in their home more than 20 years? Okay, you're the problem. I just want you to know that this is a, I'm just kidding, but not really. You know, I mean, boomers are staying in their homes a lot longer than they used to, and we're not building. And I want to just say something about your anecdotal data, like what you see. Like you, I drive around and see building everywhere, right? Like, we're building. This is amazing. When you look at the data, permits last year I haven't seen the final number, but they were slightly below 100,000. They were lower than they were in 2018. So don't just go by your eyes, go by what the data show. And it's really pretty shocking, you know, given the emphasis on housing supply from this organization and others, that we are seeing no acceleration, even though we all think we are. So anyway, all that being said, we came out of 2019 looking at a much stronger market than we anticipated. And you can see here, just looking, I've got the year-over-year change, and then the dotted line is the year-over-year 3-month moving average. And as we got into the second half, starting in July, we grew above where we were the prior year, right? So the year-over-year change got positive, and it was largest, right, in December. So we ended the year with a bang. And one of the things that was really interesting is that, except for the entry-level part of the market, which I know in many of your communities, there's no way to enter at 300,000, right? You can enter maybe a rented garage. I don't know, partial ownership of a garage. But the supply down there is so tight that you just aren't seeing growth there. But in every single other category, price category, we saw growth on a year-over-year basis, even in the luxury and ultra-luxury end that had been kind of soft for a year or two, right? So that became ignited. And you can see that here in terms of the year-over-year change in sales, where that really kind of dark, I don't know, it's like a dark cobalt blue. That's the 2 million and above. Look at it just taking off at the end of the year. So the luxury market in California isn't dead. I know that there are 3-bedroom, 2-bath homes selling in some of your communities for $2 million. It's a little bit crazy, but there you go. We also calculate at CAR a somewhat predictive and somewhat missing the mark occasionally pending sales index, and our pending sales index has been positive since June of last year. It decelerated a little bit in December, but it's still very positive. And again, I think that bodes well for your year getting into 2020. What about prices? As I said earlier, we had the largest year-over-year gain in prices in December at over 10% that we've had in about 6 years. So we really ended with a bang, driven by demand responding to low rates and a shift in the composition of what's selling to the upper end of the market. So those were kind of the two factors that we see there. And you know, this is our affordability issue here in just graphic format. When we break it out, I know that one of the questions we often get is, how do you define a luxury home? And the answer is, I can't really give you a firm answer, because a luxury home in Bakersfield is going to have a different price structure than a luxury home in Newport Beach, right? So what we do at CAR is we look at quintiles. The bottom 20%, 20, 20, 20, and the top 20%. And the takeaway here is every single price category had fairly strong price growth in December. Here's a graphic look. And for the first time in quite a while, we had an increase at the upper end of the market. Just to put things in perspective, what I've got here is Bay Area in green, Central Valley in orange, and in pink, and Southern California in orange. So you can see the run up before the financial crisis, you can see the drop, and then you can see the recovery with San Francisco. Do you know what the median home price in San Francisco is? 1.6 million is the median home price, right? Here's a look at California and SoCal. And SoCal kind of tracks the state as a whole, because we've got the high-priced coastal areas, and then we've got the Inland Empire, right, where the median home price is $300,000 to $400,000. So that's kind of mirroring. I got a question from a member, and I thought I'd share with you the slides that we came up with, asking about the change in housing prices versus the change in the stock market. Right, so we looked at 2003 to the present, and for the state as a whole, we had about a 53% increase in price. The stock index went up 190%, but not a leveraged investment, right? So that's one of the crucial pieces here. And then he was selling in Manhattan Beach, so he asked us to do that comparison, and the home price appreciation in Manhattan Beach was quite a bit higher at 82%. But there's no doubt the stock market has been very good to the people that have invested there. And then finally, look at what's been going on with sales prices as opposed to list prices. And sales prices have been leading list prices, and that's not always the case. But again, this fairly dramatic change in the market that we saw in the second half of the year has been playing itself out. So I'm often asked, you know, you talk about so many statistical variables. What is one thing I should watch to find out what's going to happen in my area? And I think years ago I would have said, look at jobs, look at overall economic growth, right? Because that's going to tell you where the demand side is. But today I would tell you, in addition, you've got to look at inventory, because that's going to tell you where sales are headed. And remember that earlier graph I showed you where transactions were essentially flat for 10 years? Look at inventory since 2012. It has been very constrained. I mean, typically before this last decade, a normal inventory. Does everybody remember when you had inventory? 6 to 7 months supply of homes on the market. Now it's like a 2 to 3 month supply of homes on the market. So it's tight, and I would argue this is the new normal. Right, this is the new normal. And again, there's been talk about the silver tsunami, right? The silver tsunami, which unfortunately is the exit for all the baby boomers, right? And this is going to bring all of their homes back on the market. Well, one of the research studies I want to do is how many of them are going to will their homes to their kids, so their kids who've already moved in can stay and live in California, right? We have extended families everywhere, right? It's bringing us all closer together. And the trajectory for inventory is it's getting tighter, right? And again, sales heated up in the second half of last year, and inventory started to tighten back up. Here's a look again at the year-over-year change in inventory. And what have we got the last 6 months of 2019? We have a shrinking inventory. And in December, it was down 26.5%. Wow, right? Compared to the year before. So that's the market that you are facing. The only price category where we had a slight uptick in inventory was where you probably don't need it, the 3 million and higher market. And how long does it take to sell a home? You saw it earlier, about 28 days for the state as a whole. When we break it into price categories for the ultra high end or the top 20% of the market, it takes about 39 days. So how do you use this data? Use it to set the expectations of your sellers, because not only do they think the value of their home has continued to do this, for the last couple of years, they think the tenor of the buyers is, I'll pay anything and let's get this going. And buyers, what I'm hearing is buyers want a Pinterest-ready home. If you have popcorn ceilings, forget about it, right? Unless it's a tear down. But there are things that they don't want to deal with. You often have two professionals partnering together, raising a family. They don't want to go through all that, and they do spend too much time on HGTV and Pinterest, right? And that's where their expectations are. So if that's not what this house looks like, just set the expectations before they go in so they don't make a U-turn and walk back out. About a little over a third of the active listings today have had at least one price reduction. The median amount is a little bit over 4%, but the number has actually gone down. So the year-over-year change in active listings with reductions has been declining the last 4 months because the market's stronger. Right? They don't have to do that. And I assume it's also because the realtors are all doing a really great job of setting the price right? Right? No games anymore. Set it right, and that's, I think, the way to deal with this market. So I know you don't like to admit this, but you do have members that sell homes in LA County, right? As a Long Beach native, I have to say that. So just a little bit of data on LA before we get to Orange County. So here's just a crib sheet. Not going to go through it all. Takeaway is LA County is an economic powerhouse. It's seen very good job growth. Things have been pretty good. Unemployment rate is at 4.3%, which is very, very low for LA County. We've also seen sales rising for the last 4 months of 2019, and that second slide over there again is the year-over-year percentage change. In December, it was over 10% higher than it was a year before. It was 11.9% higher in terms of sales. In terms of prices, look at the change in prices. Look at the year-over-year and change in prices. In LA County, median is $641,000. and it was up 9% on a year-over-year basis. So low rates have a little bit of a water balloon impact, right? You squeeze here, and it gets higher over here. Here's LA County in terms of inventory in December. You were at a 2.4 month supply, and you can see that flatlining that I talked about since 2012. Okay, here's Orange County. Again, another economic powerhouse with an unemployment rate of 2.3%. Wow, very, very strong labor market. In terms of housing permits, I kind of alluded to the fact that statewide housing permits were down slightly in 2019. 2019, 9,055. LAEDC is projecting 9,017 for 2020. So again, even though your eyeballs are kind of focused on all that you're seeing, we're not seeing as much new construction as you think we are. Orange County sales defied what we saw statewide. They were up almost 2% compared to 2018. Increase of 1.8%. And in December, the median home price in this county was $840,000. So huge, huge increase, 7% increase ending the year. And inventory at 2.3 months is the lowest it's been in 15 years. So all of you boomers, let's get this initiative passed so you can right-size your home. If all your kids have moved back in, never mind, build some ADUs in the back, we're good, right? Take advantage of the law. So anyway, here's a look at some of the cities in kind of the overall area. 2019, still very similar to what we saw before. The biggest drop was in Westchester. And of course, these areas, what's going on in them. But even a 10% change is not really all that much, right, in terms of the numbers that we are overall looking at. Here's a look at the price performance in those cities. And except for Cerritos, had a little bit of a drop, 2.3% at the end of the year. Every single city had some pretty good price appreciation, especially one of the most affordable areas, right, which is Norwalk, right? They had almost a 10% increase year over year in prices. So you have the demand seeking out the more affordable levels. And of course, this also raises issues of gentrification and all that other stuff. The housing issues that our Sacramento staff is navigating for the association are not easy. They're not clear cut. And then in every one of those cities, we had a sharp drop in inventory compared to where we were in December of 2018. Properties are staying on the market when you look at 2019 as a whole for a little bit shorter period of time. Again, that strength that we ended the second half of the year. So let me kind of switch back to kind of looking at the kind of statewide perspective that did have a little bit of a downshift and talk about what's going on with supply and affordability. So when you look back at our population, I mentioned that we went from 20 million to 40 million in 50 years. So this is just we just picked years that we could kind of compare everything. So the California population in 1986 was anyone selling real estate here in 86? A few of you, right? We had 27 million. End of 2018, we were at 39. California realtors, we had 112,000 realtors in 1986. In 2018, we had 205,000. Home sales in 1986 were 393,000. In 2018, they were 402,000. And statewide permits were 255,000. In 1988, in 2018, they were 114,000. So you see the problem, right? We have a lot more realtors and essentially not a lot more transactions. And I know for all of you, you're here, you want to learn, you're engaged with, one of the best or the best local trade association in the state. This doesn't, you're going to be fine because you're working it, right? You understand it. But we probably have over half our members that aren't either active in the business or aren't doing very well in the business. So I don't want you to be afraid of these numbers, right? If you're in it and you're working the market, you're doing great, right? You've got a career and you've got an ability to support yourself. But we've got a lot of people that are just not able to compete. Here's a look at the permit situation one more time so you can see why the governor ran on a platform that said we need to build 3.5 million new units in California over the next 5 years. That will never, ever happen, but we need to figure it out. One of the things that we did with our survey research is we did a consumer survey where we asked people about what they would tolerate in terms of new construction near where they live. And it says, which of the following would you least like to see built? So multifamily housing is the enemy for about a third of the people. But look at the bottom. 36% said, I'm okay with new construction, whatever it looks like. These are the people that aren't showing up at the Planning Commission meetings, right? These are the people that aren't there representing a pro-development perspective. These are the people that aren't sharing visually with people what multifamily housing could look like. Has anybody been to Europe recently? Paris, Rome? I mean, that's multifamily housing is pretty awesome, right? When you have a city that isn't built around an automobile, it can look really different and everybody loves it. So it's 2020. Maybe we can get rid of the vision of a cell block and replace it with a lifestyle that many Californians would find very attractive. We also asked what was the biggest problem that you could see with kind of higher density development near where you are. And 21% said no concerns, but the other people had, I think, very valid concerns, right? And so those are things that when we talk about new development, we also have to talk about infrastructure, right? We have to talk about transportation. We have to talk about pricing. And, I may not be here in 20 years, we'll see, but I'd love to see what the world or what we look like when maybe we all don't own cars, when this very different world that has been laid out for us is a reality. So we've talked about low rates and we've talked about mortgage payments going down a little bit. But the reality is housing affordability is still the major issue that we are facing in California. So anybody that sold anybody a home in 2012 ought to buy some champagne and go celebrate with them. And they have made a wonderful decision. They got in when you could get in, and their equity growth has been spectacular. But for the rest of us in California, we're looking at a index that's 26% below what we're seeing nationally. So it has really been a bit of a challenge. Here's a look comparing by county. In Orange County, 26% of the people that live here can afford to buy that median-priced $850,000 home. And compared to the peak, we're down significantly. In LA, back in 2012, 56% could afford. Today, 33% can afford. And during that period of time in LA, the down payment requirement increased 100%, from $53,000 to $108,000. Right? And if you're working kind of at a normal job and don't have parents that can help you out, it takes a long time to save $100,000, right? So what's happening is the the state of California will be majority renter by 2025. In 5 years as a state, we will be majority renter. And today, many of our cities are already majority renter, not just San Francisco. And even in the Central Valley, Merced, Salinas, Davis, Fresno, those are majority renter cities as well, because affordability is relative, right? You know, if you're living in Fresno that's seen some good price appreciation, you could get priced out, right? Even though that's one of the most affordable areas in the state. So what's happening is, you know, we remember the gold, well, none of us remember the gold rush, but there was a gold rush, and everybody wanted to come to California. And after World War II, I know my dad was one, he was in the Navy, he grew up in Pittsburgh, he came to the port of LA and Long Beach during the war, and he thought, this is awesome. And so after he graduated from, it was called Carnegie Tech at the time, he drove with my mom, was pregnant with my brother, out to California. I mean, it was, a lot of people did, right? And my mother was from Iowa. Long Beach has the Iowa picnic every year. She was part of that. But it's changing. You know, a lot of people that live here aren't sitting around waiting for this situation to be remedied. They're having to make some really tough choices to go the other direction. So since 2010, and this is a little bit outdated, we've had net domestic migration of about 1 million people. So this isn't population growth, this is how many people that live in California have left for another state, and how many people that live in other states have moved to California. And here's what it looks like. So up in the Bay Area, we asked the following question. If you lived in the Bay Area and moved, where did you go? And the top 2 recipients during this 7-year period were San Joaquin County, right, where you can still kind of commute to Silicon Valley if you don't mind spending 4 hours a day on a train, or Sacramento, right? And then it's Oregon, Nevada, Texas, blah, blah, blah. So then we asked a question, what about the people in Sacramento? Where did they go, right? Well, they left. They went to Nevada, Idaho, and Oregon. If they went to Idaho, I hope they changed their license plate before they moved, because not every Californian is welcome with open arms in other states. Had some moving down south to San Bernardino, had some Central Valley interest, and then Colorado and Oklahoma, and even a few to Kentucky. Okay, what about us down here? So we asked, you live in Southern California, and you moved, where did you go, right? The outmigration was to Riverside and San Bernardino, and we all know that, right? The Inland Empire is our ace in the hole, right? That's where the affordable housing is. You can always go there. And then Texas, Arizona, Nevada, Bakersfield, Washington, Oregon, et cetera. Then we asked, where did the people in the Inland Empire go? They went to Texas, they went to Arizona, went to Bakersfield, Georgia, Utah, North Carolina, Idaho, Nevada, Colorado, and Hawaii. So there's a bit of a leapfrog effect going on, right? Everything is changing. So migration used to be just about jobs. Now it's about housing and jobs. And so I want to say something. I have often gotten this question, you know, the taxes in California are so high that, you know, my very wealthy client is thinking of leaving. And I have no doubt that is true. But when you look at the numbers, we actually have a net increase in wealthy people coming to California, because as much as they hate paying the taxes, they can afford it. It's really worse than that. We are losing our future. We are losing the kids. We're losing the working class, right? We're losing the people that just can't afford to buy near where they work, or have just decided, I don't want to do that commute. You know, I drove from Pasadena to Brentwood yesterday, and I was just a wreck by the end of it, you know? I mean, the thing about Waze is, it's like, it shaves off a few minutes, but is it worth the anxiety, you know, of going through these neighborhoods where there's this line, no Wazers, and slow down? It's just like, can't take it anymore. Anyway, and I think the longer term perspective is to really just remember the lesson of Japan. Remember the 1980s. Remember all those I still remember his name was Joel. Oh, I can't remember his last name. But anyway, talking about the economic miracle in Japan. Guess what happened to the economic miracle in Japan? Probably a lot of things, but they quit having babies, right? They don't have growth, right? They're not who we look to today. And you wonder what price California will pay for becoming this housing elite, right? Where home ownership becomes a luxury good. Here's another way to look at it, just by occupation, we're gaining people that do software, and we're losing people that do construction, transportation, and administrative support. So that just does that. Real quick, every year the Milken Institute ranks the top leading cities for the new economy. The takeaway here is it's not all about California anymore. There are a lot of other places that are attractive, and housing is really part of the story. And even in the small cities, you know, I think we've talked for what, 30 years about the paperless office. I don't know about your office. Mine's not paperless, but I certainly have a lot more up on my screen. But this whole idea of telecommuting has been around as long as the phone, but it's starting to take hold in part because the commutes are so miserable, right? So that's been a little bit interesting. And then finally, here's UC Merced having an impact, where Merced was one of the biggest improving cities in the Milken report. So I was really happy to see that. Now, if you want kind of more information on data, it literally took my department almost 10 years to get contracts from every MLS in California to get a data feed. And we are so excited to have it, because one of the complaints used to be, you know, you have these county economic profiles, like, who cares? I don't care about the county. I want to talk about my city. I want to talk about my zip code. Well, now we're able to do that. We have these beautiful dashboards on our site that even I can use them. So trust me, they're really user friendly. If you go to the CAR website, it says Industry 360. When you go in there at the top, there's a market data section, and then interactive market stats. And then we have all these wonderful infographics that you can put on Instagram, or put at the bottom of your signature line, just giving people a little idea of the kind of the experience and the numbers that you bring to the table, so you can be their expert. Also, under the Learn and Thrive part of our website, we have a lot of marketing tools where we've taken our data and done things like written about the outlook and given you slides. So a lot of people don't know we do all this stuff, and you may not be interested, but if you are, this is kind of what it really looks like. And then finally, we do a podcast about twice a month. Sometimes we bring in special guests, but Oscar and Jordan, and sometimes I make an appearance when I can, talk about what's going on in the market. So that's really, really helpful. So let me kind of talk a little bit about just our forecast. We need to update the 2019 slide, and again, as I indicated, we're only down 1.2%, but we're still finalizing the number. But we ended much stronger than we thought we were going to be. But our forecast for next year is for actually a little bit of an uptick in sales. I mean, we're still bouncing in that narrow band, but it looks, it definitely looks like we're going to see a continued momentum within the constraints of affordability and supply. Median price will go up. at least 2.5%. I think the number for 2019 that we're looking at is closer to about 5%, so that's been better. Housing affordability a challenge, and I don't know what to tell you about rates, but take advantage of them now, because this is not going to last forever. Right? I mean, we have had a low rate environment for quite some time, but this is really a window. So you've had a huge refi boom going on the last couple of weeks. Maybe you have clients that you could contact and say, hey, just to get in front of them and say, hey, have you thought about refiing? Here's some information that you might find useful. So I think that's really, really important. So I need to ask, should I stop now and do questions? Like, is everybody tired of hearing? I wasn't sure, like when I originally got the agenda, it was like 90 minutes of me talking, and I thought, these poor people, like I really don't want to do that. So I added some more slides, but I also want to save room. Give me a little direction. Keep going. All right. The industry has been, the internet has changed everything. Here's a look at how, I'm going to go over these very high level, okay? The internet has had very rapid adoption. It's changed our world. It's changed how we shop. It's changed how we date. Anyone here swiping left and right? You know, it's changed that. It's changed how we watch movies. Does anybody remember Saturday night at the movies? Like, oh my God, what are we gonna see, you know? And we just had to see that. Now, it's what we want when we want, right? I mean, it's pretty crazy. And how many of you have had food delivered? Right? I mean, oh, what a gift, right? Just get on your app and, you know, when we do it, the guy comes or the gal comes and I say, thank you, you've really saved us. And they say, that's what we're here for. You know, it's like a wonderful, wonderful thing. So you've just had a lot of industries that have, you know, the D word, right? Disrupted you. Great. But what about us? Well, yes and no, right? I mean, 90+% of the real estate transactions are done with the help of a real estate professional. The same as 30 years ago, right? So yeah, that's really something great. So here's just again, all these slides are available to all of you. You can kind of look at, anybody remember the 60s in real estate? It just seems like such a sleepy time. 1996, we saw Home Store. We had the Realtor.com IPO. We had the Zillow IPO. We had the Realogy IPO. I mean, that's been like a huge thing, right? Getting all of this VC money coming into an industry that was pretty sleepy before then. Then we had Opendoor, right? I'm going to talk a little bit about iBuyers, and everybody's in one funding round or another. You know, Compass is buying market share everywhere until they're not, right? The SoftBank, well, we were there. So anyway, there's just a lot of drama in our industry, but the utilization of realtors has not changed yet. And look at the kind of 10-year change in the top real estate companies. That hasn't changed a lot either. Compass, I would argue, is a traditional brokerage, right, that bought market share. The only 2018 company that is really different is the EXP, no brick and mortar model. So I would say that to a certain extent, I feel like as an industry, we're a little bit defensive about change, and we think we really have done a lot. But from the consumer's perspective, the transaction is complicated and it's painful. So I think that's really just a message. I'll go really quick, you know, that they have, this is like a simplified chart of what goes on in the real estate transaction. But there's just a lot of pain points, you know, loan approval, bidding wars, the appraisal, the paperwork, negotiating. I think all of you ought to put at the very front of your pitch what a great negotiator you are and give examples, because people like me hate negotiating. And the fact that you are so good at it, some of you love it, I know. That's like really a real plus. When we surveyed consumers who had gone through the process, only 2 out of 10 said nothing's broken. Everybody else had a problem. They thought it took too long. They thought it was inefficient. They thought it cost too much money. The one area that's probably the biggest wound is financing. And that's kind of a tough nut. When I was at Inman 2 weeks ago, there's a couple startups that, have shared equity models and so on that are trying to kind of help with that. They buy the house, but you're a part owner with them and this, that, and the other thing. I don't know, the regulations and the lending environment are such that, I don't think we want to mess with that too much, but that's really the hardest part for consumers. So it's hard to get it. The younger you are, the harder it is to get it. The money part is always the more difficult. The appraisals, I don't need to spend a lot of time on that. It's not fun for them. And for sellers, they are focused on commissions. They're focused on the ability of the buyer to stay in escrow. They're confused about the inspections and what they need to fix and what they don't, negotiation and paperwork. So I'm just going to go through these, why things fall out, their challenges. So it's tough. So we have this D word. It's called disruption. And it wasn't that long ago for many of us where the auto industry was kind of owned by General Motors, where IBM kind of owned the computer way. Everybody shopped at Sears, and essentially you had ABC, CBS, and NBC, right? And things really changed, and a lot of these companies just really didn't get it. And we do as part of our Expo Reimagine, we do a broker conference. And Pam O'Connor, I don't know how many of you know Pam, she was the CEO of leading leading companies, leading real estate companies of the world for many years. And this was her quote, and I just thought it was so good. The ultimate disruptor is an unhappy customer. And I think when we think about where we ought to be putting our focus, it's really at the consumer and how they're seeing the process, and what can you do and what can we do as an industry to make that better. One of the reasons iBuyers, and again, is iBuying new? No, we buy ugly houses, right? Not new. But I think, and one of the things they offer for a price is you get to avoid all the pain points, right? They buy your house. But here's what I think is more important about iBuying than people that want to use an iBuyer. I think it's about being the first point of contact for a potential seller, and it's about setting a floor in the market, right? Because what is better than a Zestimate? An actual offer. And that's what you get from the iBuyer. So that's kind of what I would be looking at. So I've already made this point with my students at St. Mary's College. They want to own. Realtors are here to stay. We do a survey. I'm almost done, I promise. We do a survey every year where we ask you about your last closed transaction, and it's very painful. And for any of you that have filled it out, thank you. But we ask you where that client came from. And there's a lot of data out there on where the client comes from, right? I found them online, it was a flyer, whatever. I actually think our data is more relevant and a better answer, because I think all of you know where your clients came from, right? I mean, you need that. You're running a business. You need to know what that looks like. And the top 5 responses from the realtors all involved a relationship, right? A prior transaction or a recommendation. So keep that in mind. That's the glue here. So your competition, you yesterday and every agent working harder than you do. So don't do that. Don't let them, right? Just get into it. And I think with that, I'm going to say thank you for having me. It's been wonderful. I hope it was useful.